Vienna, March 1945. The Eastern Front is collapsing under the weight of Soviet armor. Red Army units are less than 100 kilometers from the Austrian capital, advancing through mud and snow with the kind of momentum that crushes everything in its path. The Reich's intelligence apparatus, once a Byzantine network of competing agencies and shadow operations, is now in free fall. Files are being burned in oil drums. Operatives are fleeing west. And in a nondescript office building on Stahlbergasse, a final encrypted message is being transmitted. The man sending it was Hauptmann Klaus Wegener. Wegener wasn't named the public knew. No photographs in newsreels. No medals pinned to his chest at propaganda rallies. He was a Abwehr, military intelligence, attached to Section 3F, the division tasked with counterintelligence operations against Soviet networks. Fluent in Russian, Czech, and Polish. A linguist recruited straight from Heidelberg University in 1939, just months before the invasion of Poland. His personnel file, recovered decades later from fragmentary Wehrmacht archives, describe him as methodical, politically unreliable, but operationally effective. By early 1945, Wegener was coordinating the interrogation of captured Soviet agents in Vienna and managing a network of safe houses used for turned double agents. His immediate superior was Oberst Heinrich Müller, a career intelligence officer who would vanish entirely in the chaos of April. Wegener's role was quiet, administrative, buried in paperwork and coded cables. The kind of work that left no visible trace. On March 18, 1945, Wegener sent a message to Abwehr headquarters in Berlin. The cable, later recovered from a water-damaged archive in East Germany, referenced Operation Silberfaden, and requested immediate extraction authorization for 3 protected assets before Soviet occupation. The message was logged at 14:22 hours. No reply was recorded. For days later, Soviet advance units entered the outskirts of Vienna. Wegener's office was abandoned. His files, according to a British intelligence sweep conducted weeks later, had been removed or destroyed. His name appeared on an Allied arrest list dated April 10, 1945, designated Category B, intelligence personnel, detained for interrogation. He was never detained. What followed was not dramatic. No shootout at a checkpoint, no border crossing captured on film, just silence. A train manifest from March 20th showed a K. Wagner, traveling west from Vienna to Salzburg on a medical evacuation transport. The signature was illegible. No identity papers were attached to the record. A U.S. Counterintelligence Corps report from May 1945 noted an interrogation of a former Abwehr clerk who claimed Wegener had been reassigned under special order on March 19th. The clerk couldn't remember who issued the order, or wouldn't say. And then nothing. No arrest, no trial, no execution, no grave. By the time the Nuremberg prosecutors began compiling their lists, Klaus Wegener's name had already started to fade. A footnote in Abwehr rosters. A name without a face. A case without a file. Allied intelligence agencies, American OSS, British SIS, Soviet NKVD, all maintained separate arrest lists for enemy intelligence personnel. Wegener appeared on 2 of them. The third, a Soviet list declassified only in 1991, did not include his name at all. The question hung in the air like smoke. Why? If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe to support the channel. In the immediate aftermath of the war, thousands of German intelligence officers face interrogation, prosecution, or recruitment. The Nuremberg trial set the standard, but beneath that spectacle was a quieter process. Screening camps, denazification boards, intelligence debriefings conducted in requisition hotels, and makeshift detention centers across occupied Germany. Wegener's name appeared in none of them. A 1947 memo from the U.S. 7th Army's Intelligence Division requested information on Klaus Wegener, last known Vienna, Abwehr Section 3F. The response, filed 3 months later, stated simply, "No current disposition available. File transferred to higher authority." No explanation of which authority. No follow-up. The memo was stamped closed and archived. In 1952, a researcher at the Simon Wiesenthal Center noted an anomaly while cross-referencing post-war immigration records. Klaus Wagner, born 1911 in Dresden, had entered Argentina in 1948 on a Red Cross travel document issued in Genoa. The birth year matched Wagner's. The departure city was a known stop on the Ratlins, the covert escape routes used by fleeing Nazis. But the physical description was wrong. Height off by 4 centimeters. Eye color listed as brown. Wagner's Abwehr file said blue. The researcher flagged it. The file was forwarded to Interpol. No action was taken. British intelligence files declassified in 1978 included a folder labeled Wagner Klaus, subject of interest 1945 to 1950. 17 pages. 14 were redacted in their entirety. The 3 readable pages contained only bureaucratic metadata, dates of request for information, cross-references to other files, themselves still classified, and a note from 1949 stating, "Further inquiry suspended per understanding with Allied services." What understanding? With whom? The file offered no answers. Historians attempting to trace Wagner's post-war fate encountered contradictions at every turn. A former Soviet intelligence officer, interviewed in Moscow in 1989, claimed Wagner had been captured by the Red Army in April 1945 and dealt with internally. No record substantiated this. A CIA memo from 1953, partially declassified in 2003, referenced a former Abwehr officer, Vienna sector, currently employed in advisory capacity. No name was given. The context suggested signals intelligence work. An Austrian police report from 1950 mentioned a man matching Wagner's description, living under an assumed name in Innsbruck. When investigators arrived, the apartment was empty. Neighbors said the tenant had left 2 days earlier. No forwarding address. Each lead evaporated. Each trail went cold. By the 1960s, the question of Klaus Wagner had become an archival curiosity. A few scholars mentioned him in passing, usually in footnotes about Abwehr personnel unaccounted for after the war. Most assumed he had died during the collapse, another casualty lost in the fog of surrender and chaos. But the absence of a body, a death certificate, or any confirmed sighting was strange. Men of his rank and role didn't simply vanish without someone, somewhere, taking note, unless someone wanted them to. The silence wasn't accidental. It was institutional, and it had hardened over decades into something that looked like forgetting, but felt like policy. Dr. Marta Kovacs was not looking for Klaus Wagner. She was researching the Gehlen Organization, the post-war German intelligence service built by the Americans from former Wehrmacht and Abwehr personnel, a Hungarian historian specializing in Cold War intelligence. Kovacs had spent years cross-referencing CIA files declassified under Freedom of Information Act requests with newly opened Hungarian state security archives. It was 2019. She was working in a small reading room in Budapest, surrounded by boxes of yellow documents that smelled like mildew and cigarette smoke. And she noticed a pattern. Certain names appeared in American files under code names that matched references in Soviet-era Hungarian documents, except the identities were reversed. Assets listed as Soviet in one archive appeared as Western in another. Double agents, triple agents, men who had served multiple masters and survived by staying useful. One name kept appearing: Silberfaden. In a 1947 CIA operational memo, declassified in 2017 but only cataloged in 2019, Kovacs found this. Asset Silberfaden confirms continued utility in signals analysis. Recommend extension of protected status. Previous service to Allied intelligence during Vienna period verified by British liaison. No prosecution recommended. No real name was given, but the memo referenced Abwehr Section 3F, Vienna, 1944 to 45. Wagner's unit. Kovacs requested corresponding British files. After 2 years of bureaucratic delays, she received a partial release. Fragments of MI6 correspondence from 1945, heavily redacted, but enough to see the outline of something larger. One cable, dated March 15, 1945, 3 days before Wagner's last message to Berlin, was sent from a field officer in Switzerland to London. The subject line read, Silberfaden, exfiltration approval requested. The body of the cable was still redacted, But a handwritten note in the margin, overlooked by the censor, read, "Asset confirmed reliable. Extraction authorized per agreement with U.S. counterparts." The signature was illegible. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Hungarian state security files from 1948 included interrogation transcripts of former German intelligence officers detained in Soviet-occupied Hungary. One transcript mentioned a K. Wegener, who had been turned by British intelligence in 1943 and had provided information on WWII operations in Eastern Europe. The interrogator's notes added, "Subject claims Wegener exfiltrated a Western zone under Allied protection. Unable to verify. The file was marked low priority, no further action." Kovacs assembled the fragments like a broken mirror. Wegener had been in contact with British intelligence before the end of the war. He had provided information significant enough to warrant extraction. His post-war disappearance was not an escape. It was an operation. American and British intelligence had agreed to protect him. His name was scrubbed from prosecution lists deliberately. But why? And what had he given them? In 2027, the CIA declassified another batch of Cold War-era files. Among them was a 1951 debriefing summary of an unnamed former WWII officer who had provided critical intelligence on Soviet intelligence networks operating in post-war Austria and Czechoslovakia. The debriefing location, Frankfurt, West Germany. The handling agency, CIA, Western Europe Division. The code name, Silberfaden. One line stood out. Subject's wartime cooperation began March 1943, following recruitment by British SAS. Material provided included identities of Soviet penetrations within WWII, advance warning of NKVD operations in Vienna, and cryptographic vulnerabilities in Reich communication systems. Wegener hadn't switched sides in the final days. He'd been working for the Allies for 2 years before the war ended, and they'd protected him ever since. Klaus Wegener died in 1979, not in Argentina, not in hiding, but in Munich under his real name, with a modest pension and a clean record. His death certificate listed his occupation as translator. No obituary mentioned his wartime service. His name appeared in no history books, no documentaries, no trials. When Dr. Kovacs published her findings in 2027, the response was muted. A few academic journals ran articles. Intelligence historians debated the implications in seminar rooms and conference panels. But the broader public barely noticed, because by then Wegener's story had already been absorbed into the larger truth that the post-war world was built on bargains made in the shadows, that loyalties were currency, and that the victors wrote history not by erasing it, but by controlling when it was revealed. In her research, Kovacs identified references to a file labeled Silberfaden. Operational Summary, 1943 to 1950. It was mentioned in 3 separate documents across British, American, and German archives. All 3 references noted the file's existence. None confirmed its location. Requests for declassification were denied. National security concerns. The responses said, ongoing equities. 82 years after the war ended, someone, somewhere, still believed Klaus Wegener's full story needed to remain hidden. Kovacs returned to the Hungarian archive one last time. In a margin note on the 1948 interrogation transcript, she found something she'd missed before. A single line in faded pencil. Subject claimed Wegener was not the only one. Said there were others. Wouldn't name them. The interrogator had underlined it twice, then crossed it out. The truth about Klaus Wegener is no longer a mystery. It's a matter of record, partial and managed, released only when it no longer mattered, or when someone decided it was safe. But the files still reference names that remain redacted, code names without identities, operations without explanations. And somewhere in a basement archive in Langley, London, or Berlin, a folder marked Silberfaden still sits, sealed, waiting for a date that may never come. Because the real question was never whether Klaus Wegener betrayed the Reich. It was who else did, and whether we're ready to know. The snow falls softly now over Vienna, over the building on Stahlberg Gas where Wegener once worked, now converted into luxury apartments. No plaque marks the spot. No monument stands for the man who vanished into protection. History forgets, but the files remember. And what they remember, they release only when the living can no longer be held accountable. Only when the truth has aged into trivia. Only when it's safe. Klaus Wegener was never arrested after World War II because arresting him would have required explaining why he mattered. And explaining why he mattered would have meant admitting he'd been theirs all along. So instead, they let him disappear. And 82 years later, we finally know why. Because some secrets aren't kept to protect the past. They're kept to protect the system that decided what the past would be allowed to say. If you like this story, please subscribe to support this channel.